Hello, luminaries! Welcome back to CSI Crowdsourced Illuminations. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and select all notifications so you know when I go live or when I post a video. Today, we are continuing our series, Book Nook. We are reading The Franklin Cover-Up, Child Abuse, Satanism, and Murder in Nebraska by John DeCamp. Settle in, get comfy, and enjoy the story. As usual, if you hear any noises in the background, dogs snoring, kids, music, airplanes, I live by a private airport and it's a busy time of day for planes right now, so you might hear a few of those, but if you hear any of that, just try to ignore it. I really appreciate it. It seems that life continues to go on even when I'm recording these videos. Last time we left off with Chapter 1. This time we'll be starting with Chapter 2, Larry King, a man well known to children. The first alarm went off on June 10, 1985, when the Washington County, Nebraska Sheriff's Department contacted a Nebraska Department of Social Services social worker handling the case of Sean, Sally, and Steve MacArthur. These names have been changed. The children were living in foster care with Jarrett and Barbara Webb of Fort Calhoun. The social worker wrote up the call. The Sheriff's Department phoned today and stated they have the MacArthur children in their custody and they had picked them up from the Webb home due to child abuse complaint. Sean had welts and scratches over parts of his back, which he said the Webbs had beat him with a railroad iron and belt. They also had picked up the Webb's son, Joey, age 16. Joey also complained of being beaten by his parents. Sean said the Webbs have been beating them for quite some time, and this is not the first time this has happened. They were afraid to say anything the other times. Jarrett Webb worked for the Omaha Public Power District and was a board member of the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union, headed by Lawrence E. King, Jr. His wife, Barbara, is Larry King's cousin. Foster child Sean MacArthur and adopted son Joey Patterson Webb were removed from the Webb's custody that month. Other of their foster and adopted children, there were as many as 9 in the house at one time, tried to make their break, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. In August, Joey's sister Kimberly Patterson, age 14, and another brother, Michael, ran away but were returned to the Webbs in November. Nellie Patterson Webb, 16, fled to the home of her grandmother, Ruby Patterson. The Fremont office of DSS reported on the reasons in a document dated December 18, 1985. Our office and a deputy interviewed Kimberly, who had obtained permission to visit Nellie at their grandmother's, and Nellie separately and together. Both girls stated numerous times that they refused to go back to the Webbs. Both girls have stated they have received whippings and beatings from both Barbara and Jarrett at different times. These started in 1978, approximately 8 months after they moved into the Webb home. The girls said they were hit with objects such as an extension cord, a belt, a black thing, in parentheses, rubber hose, and a railroad prop, in parentheses, a narrow piece of heavy black rubber approximately 2 feet long with several holes in each end. Before they were struck, they were made to remove their clothing. They were mainly struck on their back or on their behind, but occasionally on the head or face. Social workers removed Nellie, whose full name was Cornelia M. Patterson, name changed, Webb, from the Webb home and placed her with a foster parent, Ron and Kathleen Sorensen, in Blair, Nebraska. Soon after this move, she was interviewed at the Washington County Sheriff's Office by State Patrol investigator Jane F. Tooley. Tooley found out that the abuse was not limited to beatings. Tooley wrote in her report, June 30, 1986, as follows. She stated that she had been sexually abused. Nellie stated that when she was approximately 9 or 10 years of age, that Jarrett Webb kissed her for a long time and that she pulled away because she couldn't breathe and it was nasty. She stated he was French kissing her, and she stated that he was slobbering in her mouth. Nellie stated again that when she was approximately 9 or 10 years old, that on one occasion Jarrett Webb made her take a nap with him in his bed, and she stated, "He played with all my body parts. He touched her vagina, that he put his fingers inside her." Nellie stated that when she was 10 and 11 years old, at nighttime, when everyone was in bed, Jarrett Webb called her into his bedroom a couple of times. When she didn't come into the room, he then told her to come in or he would whip her. She stated that Jarrett Webb pulled the sheet down and pulled her on top of him. She stated that she could feel his hair against her leg and knew that he didn't have any underwear on. This is really hard to read. I might not have chosen the best book to start with. When Nellie was 15, she told Tooley Jarrett Webb punished her by ordering her to undress and lie on the bed, and then beating her with a rubber strap. Next, he made her lie on her back, put her legs in the air, and he pressed himself between her legs and started humping her. He started beating her again with the strap. He then started sucking on her breast. Nellie stated that she started crying and that Webb left. When in February of 1986, the Department of Social Services requested immediate and emergency removal of Kendra and Michael Webb from the Webb home, it listed 8 separate concerns among them. 2. Repeated allegations of physical abuse told to our department by 6 children during separate interviews. A. Of being struck for long periods of time while naked by various objects, including a belt, rubber hose, and the railroad prop. B. Denial of meals in the home. 3. Sexual abuse of Nellie by Jarrett, supported by polygraph tests given to Nellie, January 30, 86. 4. The intense concern by the children out of the Webb home for their physical and emotional well-being of the children remaining in the home. DSS memos show that Webb aggressively sought to terminate their status as adoptive parents of Nellie and Kimberly, starting immediately after Nellie's flight in November 1985. Under DSS rules, this would cut short an investigation into the mistreatment of the girls. Reversing an adoption was not a routine procedure. Regarding a relinquishment of an adopted child, the department does not accept one easily, noted one DSS social worker in her log of the Patterson-Webb case. The Webbs insisted on it. Social workers recorded that in January 1986, Barbara Webb was crying and carrying on, inquired about allegations the girls were making, and wanted to get relinquishment over with. Negotiations on behalf of the Webbs were conducted by attorney Gary Randall, whose brother Casey Randall was in the orbit of Larry King's Franklin Credit Union. Nellie and Kimberly referred to Casey as Larry's maid. Gary Randall arranged the relinquishment and, with the help of the very official who would have handled a criminal prosecution of the Webbs for child abuse, had there been one at the time, Washington County Prosecutor Patrick Tripp. In June 1986, in the face of a pattern of gross abuse of children by the Webbs, the state suspended their foster care license. Prosecutor Patrick Tripp again came to the rescue, deciding not to file sexual abuse charges or any other charges against Jarrett or Barbara Webb. Instead of investigating her reports about the Webbs' involvement in pornography and child prostitution, Tripp called Nellie Webb a liar, lie detector tests notwithstanding. Tripp's attitude was recorded by Julie Walters, a youth care worker called on to interview Nellie and Kimberly Patterson Webb in March of 1986 because they had described abuse of boys residing at Boys Town, the large orphanage west of Omaha, where Walters was employed. In Walters' 50-page report on the child abuse described to her by the girls, Tripp figures as an adversary of the children. When presented with Jane Tooley's investigation, Pat Tripp, the Washington County prosecutor, said he didn't believe Nellie and wanted her to take a polygraph test. At his request, Nellie was given 4 polygraph tests administered by a state trooper at the State Patrol office at Center Street in Omaha. The state trooper, after Nellie's testing was completed, told Kathleen Sorensen he tried to break Nellie down, but he was convinced she was telling the truth. He also told Nellie that she passed and that he believed her. Although the polygraph test showed Nellie was not deceptive, attorney Pat Tripp maintained he still didn't believe what Nellie said. He said Nellie had fantasized those stories to the point that she believed they were true. Tripp's line that child victims in Nebraska just invent abuses and that therefore their complaints need not be seriously investigated would be heard from one law enforcement agency after another throughout the Franklin case, down to the perjury conviction of victim witness Alicia Owen. For Pat Tripp, there was a personal element in this case. He was a good friend, according to foster parents, cited in a September 1989 report by legislative Franklin Committee investigator Karen Ormiston, of 2 individuals named by Nellie and Kimberly Webb as involved with the Webbs: Fort Calhoun Superintendent of Schools Stuart Finch and Fort Calhoun Schools High School Principal Kent Miller. Between late 1985 and June 1986, thanks to Tripp, the Webbs escaped both a DSS investigation and possible criminal prosecution. Shortly after his refusal to file criminal charges in the case, Tripp quit as Washington County Attorney. Today, he is a prominent lawyer in Omaha. Well known as they were, Stuart Finch and Kent Miller were small fry compared to another name that appeared in Walter's report, the same person for whom Nellie and Kimberly said Casey Randall was the maid, Larry King. Walters wrote as follows: While the Webbs were away, the kids snooped through the house. They found, 1. Pornographic videotapes in a bag under the Webbs' bed, which the kids played in the VCR while Webbs were gone. 1 tape specifically showing teenagers involved in sexual activity. Nellie and Kimberly knew from eavesdropping that Larry King supplied the Webbs with videotapes. 2. Pornographic magazines in the basement. Once, when Sean was suspected of snooping around in the magazines, he was not allowed to eat anything at the Webbs' house for 1 week. 3. A box of a lot of romantic novels in Miss Webb's closet, i.e., mothers having sex with their sons. 4. Stacks of 8 by 10, approximately, photo envelopes marked "Do Not Bend" in Mrs. Webb's closet. 5. Photos of naked white women in Webb's bedroom dresser drawers. I'm guessing that the white women weren't in the Webb's bedroom dresser drawers. I'm guessing that the photos were there and the photos were of naked white women. Just a side note. Although this book is really important and shares a really important message that spans the time from which it was written to current, the writing is not the best, and it's actually hard to read. There's a lot of really long sentences. You can tell it was written by an attorney. Okay. Walter's report also conveys the Webb's pricey lifestyle and the involvement of more people, including Larry King, in their activities. Quote, although at the 3/7/86 hearing, Mr. Webb stated that he earns $32,000 a year, the Webb's home is furnished quite expensively. $2,000 paintings, crystal, silver, several VCRs, TVs, etc. Also, Mrs. Webb wears a 4-carat diamond ring, a full-length fur coat, all custom-made dresses, expensive accessories. When they throw a party, it includes caterers and limousines. Larry King attends meetings, parties at the Omaha Girls Club about every other week, and he sometimes invited Joey Webb or Nellie by calling the Webbs and telling them to have one of the kids ready in so many minutes. Nellie said they had no choice about attending these functions. She said she attended only once about 2 years ago, age 14, but Joey attended regularly from the time he was in 7th grade, approximately age 12 or 13, until he left the Webb's home at age 16. When Nellie attended, she and Larry King went alone in his limo. Other times, Mrs. King and Mr. and Mrs. Webb also attended. Nellie described these functions as lasting about 45 minutes. She said she attended one held on a Friday evening at about 7 p.m. There were about 10 to 15 older men present and about 25 young teenage girls there. The girls all signed a brown notebook Larry King had. Nellie had appeared very frightened and teared up when asked about, end quote, document illegible, end quote. Next paragraph of this write-up. Larry King either called or sent invitations to Nellie, Kimberly, and Joey to attend the parties at his home, which are held about every other week. This began about 2 years ago. Again, Nellie said the kids had no choice about whether or not they would attend. They were driven over to King's with Mr. and Mrs. Webb. Nellie and Kimberly said they talked with the boys at those parties, who said they were from Boys Town. From Boys Town yearbook photos, after examining 83, 84, and the 85 yearbooks, Kimberly said 4 boys had all attended some of Larry's parties during the summers of 84 and 85. Nellie was afraid to mention any names, but earlier had mentioned a Brent, whose picture she didn't find in the yearbooks, who told her he had left Boys Town in 84. Brent was flown to another city somewhere in Larry's private plane to work for someone else after he and Larry had a disagreement. At the parties, There are usually about 30 adults present, male and females, more white than black guests, because according to Larry, and Larry's black, blacks get ignorant when they drink and tighter with their money, and whites spend more money when they're drunk. Also present were some prostitutes, ages unknown but not teenagers, and illegible, ages 16 to 22. And Nellie and Kimberly, about 20 kids total. If a man was interested in a young lady, he held out a folded $50 or $100 bill in front of them and whispered something in their ear. $50 or $100? Good Lord. The ladies down on, the adult ladies down on Figaro make more than that. Goodness gracious, that's terrible. I mean, they shouldn't be prostituted out anyway. I'm just saying, goodness, they're just treated like meat, a commodity. Okay, sorry, and rant. Then they went upstairs or to some other area of the house. Nellie and Kimberly said the prostitutes told them they gave half of the money they got to Larry King. Larry also gave some of the boys at these parties new cars. The sexual activity was not always behind closed doors or confined to the upstairs rooms, and sometimes involved more than two people. Couples engaged in sexual activity were same sex as well as opposite sex. The money Joey told Nellie and Kimberly he made working for Larry, the Webbs took from him supposedly to keep for him. The girls talked about Larry King's power to command underage youth to do his bidding. Quote, Larry claims to donate money to Boys Town and be on the board of directors at Girls Club. Nellie said Larry has gotten Boys Town boys and other boys to his home by asking them to do some yard work. If Larry asks the young man to do something and he refuses, Larry might hit him. Nellie said Larry has a bad temper. Larry also tells the young men they'll get hurt. End quote. Julie Walters' write-up contains the most explosive account by the Patterson Webb girls, which marked the pornography and prostitution network they were caught up in as a scandal of national scope. What they told was so awful that it screamed for immediate investigation. In the course of attempts by law enforcement personnel and, later on, news media to belittle the children's testimony, however, this particular item from Nellie's account would serve the opposite purpose. How can anything she says be believed? The line went. If she says this, you can't believe her. The passage in Julie Walters' handwriting in her report reads as follows, quote, Nellie also accompanied Mr. and Mrs. King and their son, Prince, on trips to Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C., beginning when she was 15 years old. She missed 22 days of school almost totally due to these trips. Nellie was taken along on the pretense of being Prince's babysitter. Last year, she met Vice President George Bush and saw him again at one of the parties Larry gave while on a Washington, D.C. trip. At some of the parties, there are just men, as was the case at the party George Bush attended, older men and younger men in their early 20s. Nellie said she has seen sodomy committed at those parties. At other parties during Larry's trips, Larry had local prostitutes in their 20s and 30s there to entertain his male guests. At these parties, Nellie said every guest had a bodyguard, and she saw some of the men wearing guns. All guests had to produce a card which was run through a machine to verify the guest was, in fact, who they said they were, and then each guest was frisked down before entering the party. End quote. This was not the last time that the name of George Bush would surface in the Franklin affair. After the Patterson-Webb girls raised Larry King's name, Julie Walters asked some discreet questions about King of Boys Town employees and of some people in the North Omaha community. Walters summarized what she was told as follows. Quote, "If you mess with me, you'll get your legs broken." End quote. Quote, "On the outside, he was all the appearances of an upstanding citizen, but underneath, he's very dirty." End quote. Quote, Omaha was a very large underworld. Omaha has a very large underworld and has a very powerful man nationally. Maybe he doesn't have all the connections personally, but he knows the people who do. King used to be very active in Big Brothers and took more than an appropriate interest in the young men." End quote. Walters also recorded information from Fort Calhoun school officials Deward Finch and Kent Millard, whose good friend, quote unquote, Washington County prosecutor Pat Tripp was. Finch would later be named by two other victim witnesses as an associate of Larry King. Walters wrote, "Kimberly overheard Mrs. Webb tell someone on the phone, 'I got him, Finch, all the way. I caught him several times down there with black girls.' Nellie saw Mr. Finch leave the Webb home once as he returned home from the school, and Kimberly saw him leave the Webb house several times during daytime hours. Kimberly's first period class at school is a study hall, which is located across the hall from the school's office. She said Mr. Finch would regularly call the Webbs and say, 'It's time for another meeting.' Mr. Finch would interrupt whatever he was doing when the Webbs arrived to meet with them, meeting in the school office sometimes for several hours. At some meetings, Kent Miller, principal of Fort Calhoun High School, was also present. Mrs. Webb almost always carried a large Gucci bag, almost the size of a shopping bag, with her into these meetings. Kimberly said Mrs. Webb carried some photo envelopes from Mrs. Webb's closet with her at least once into these meetings, telling Kimberly she was going to show Mr. Miller pictures from their trip. The Walters report was turned over to law enforcement agencies by March 1986. The DSS logs were also accessible. Law enforcement officials failed to pursue the many clues and leads provided in the eyewitness accounts by children living with the Webbs, which might have taken them into a clean-out of child prostitution, pornography, and interstate transportation of child prostitutes from Boys Town. While they stalled, the trail grew cold. County Prosecutor Patrick Tripp called Nellie Patterson Webb a liar after she passed 4 lie detector tests. Nobody was indicted. Jarrett and Barbara Webb went free, and Larry King was invited back to sing the Star-Spangled Banner at the Republican National Convention in 1988, as he had done in 1984. Chapter 3: Pornography and Ritual Murder. On May 5, 1988, Margot Georgia and her daughter Brenda Parker, 17, filed a complaint against an Omaha photographer Rusty Nelson, which the Omaha Police Department, OPD, logged under possible child pornography. According to police records, Nelson approached Brenda at a store where she was a cashier and told her he was doing some photographic work for the Easter Seals campaign. He left her his business card, which read, Rusty Nelson, the cameraman, creative photography. When Brenda telephoned, Nelson said he needed to take pictures of redheads like her for a European portfolio, and that she would pose wearing swimsuits and lingerie. Brenda asked if she could bring her mother to the photography session, to which Nelson agreed. Officer Earl Carmian interviewed Parker and Georgia on May 9 about what they had seen 5 days earlier. During the live 5-hour session with Nelson at his studio in the Twin Towers, Carmian said, quote, Nelson took several photographs of Parker in various types of clothing, although no swimsuits or lingerie were worn. Brenda stated that Nelson repeatedly made references to Parker in her birthday suit and making her breasts look bigger. Nelson never specifically asked Parker to pose nude or semi-nude, but did try to get her to show as much skin as possible, and also tried to make Parker show as much cleavage as possible. Repeatedly, Nelson tried to persuade Parker to model in lingerie as well as a form of clothing known as teddies. Parker indicated she refused to do this. During the course of the photographic sessions, Parker's mother, Margot Giorgio, I've been saying that wrong this whole time, Georgiou, Georgiu, Georgiou, looked at several photographs which were scattered about the apartment and apparently taken by Nelson. Margot Georgiou stated that she observed several photographs of nude females ranging in age, in her estimation, from 20 years old to as young as possibly 12. Several of the females in the photographs showed frontal nudity. Suspicious about the creative photography setup, Margot Georgiou phoned around to various modeling agencies and schools in Omaha, to which Nelson had claimed he supplied pictures. No one there had heard of him, with the exception of a man at one agency who called Nelson a pervert and warned Georgiou to keep her daughter away from him. That's when she called the police. Officer Carmian reported as follows. Brenda Parker indicated that she suspected Nelson to be a homosexual. Parker identified Nelson as being a white male, approximately 25 years old, 5'9", 140 pounds, with dishwater blonde hair and a small blonde mustache. He was casually dressed and appeared quite feminine. During their conversation, Parker stated that Nelson said that he does work at Mac's, which is a gay bar located in downtown Omaha, and he further stated that he frequents gay bars. Parker stated that Nelson continually offered various foods and drinks to both Parker and her mother. Nelson placed a very large bowl of strawberries on a table, offering them to Brenda and her mother. They were also offered to drink some champagne. During the conversation, Nelson stated that he was self-employed, but made a couple of references to the boss, keeping the place well stocked, and the boss let him stay there rent-free. It is unknown who the boss is. End quote. The officer sent to investigate Nelson's digs quickly established that the boss was Larry King. Quote, on Wednesday, 25 May 88, reporting officer Michael Hoke went to the Twin Towers, 2900 Farman Street, and spoke with the owner-operator of the Twin Tower complex. He indicated that a party by the name of Rusty Nelson, who was occupying apartment number 3B, which was leased to Larry King, has since moved out of the apartment complex. End quote. Nelson had suddenly vacated on May 14, 9 days after Georgiou and her daughter filed their complaint. In the same building, Larry King also paid the rent on a luxury penthouse. Officer Hoke reported, quote, "Since King has rented the apartment in August 1987, the manager believed that he has possibly put $50,000 into the apartment in such things as decorating, drapes, and furnishings." He went on to state that he had bought a couch from one of the furniture dealers in Omaha that would not fit in the elevator as it was being transported to King's apartment, and as a result of this, a crane was rented for the amount of $1,200 to have the couch lifted to the apartment from the outside. He also stated that the apartment was very elegantly furnished and the $50,000 outlay would not include what he described as original paintings, along with what is believed to be possibly a solid silver chair. He also stated that he knows that King drives at least 5 different vehicles. There are three of the vehicles being Mercedes-Benzes, one being a Cadillac Elant, and the other being some type of sports car. He also stated he believes that King owns properties in Washington, D.C. He went on to state that King has a habit of throwing names around, and it is believed he is very influential in the Republican Party. He also indicated that he does not understand how King has as much money as he does to spend. King does not actually live at the penthouse apartment in the Twin Towers, but uses the apartment for parties and occasionally stays at the apartment. He stated that he had talked to a realtor who indicated that King apparently attempted to purchase a residence approximately 5 years ago, and at that time had trouble coming up with the down payment for the house. It seemed strange to him that in 5 years King has come into as much money as he spends. At a neighboring complex, the Orpheum Tower, Officer Hoke learned that tenant Larry King sublet an apartment to a young man who was a disc jockey at the Max Bar. King had told the building manager that he was renting the apartment as a place to stay when he worked late, so that he didn't have to travel out to a suburban home. Hoke asked the Orpheum manager if she knew any particulars or had heard any type of information about Larry King, as it seemed very strange that he would rent an apartment in the Orpheum Tower and is presently renting an apartment in the Twin Towers. She indicated that she did not know any specifics about Larry King. However, she stated that she has heard rumors that he is a very heavy drug dealer and that she has heard from more than one individual that this is the case. She stated that she also heard that Larry King is a homosexual and has a preference of young men or boys. The OBD dropped its probe of Rusty Nelson, his apparent pornography operations, and his boss. But on June 28, 1988, Officer Carmian was dispatched to interview a different girl whose terrible story pointed to the same clique. She was 15-year-old Loretta Smith, who lived with her mother and brother in Omaha. At the time Carmian talked to her, Loretta was hospitalized at Richard Young Hospital, where she had told a therapist, in the words of Carmian's report, about incidents in which she has been photographed nude or partially nude, as well as instances of devil worship. Carmian wrote that Loretta was rather articulate for a 15-year-old and spoke and acted rather maturely for her age. Excerpts from Carmian's report provide the outline of her story as follows. Smith initiated the conversation by indicating that approximately 5 or 6 years ago, when she was 9 years old, she went to a party with some friends much older than her. There she met a white male who coaxed her into modeling for him. He offered to take Smith home if Smith would pose for some pictures. Initially, the unidentified white male took photographs of her with a Polaroid camera of her fully clothed, although finally she agreed to pose for one completely nude photograph taken by this white male. Smith then spoke of occasions when she went to the North Omaha Girls Club on Lake Street with friends of hers, whom she identified as Nellie and Kimberly Webb. There she discovered that they were also modeling. Smith stated that those field trips consisted of the girls being taken to a photographic studio where pictures were taken of them either nude or partially clad. Smith also stated that she was not spoken to or knows the whereabouts of either Nellie or Kimberly Webb, not having seen them for approximately 3 years. She stated that a number of adults whom she referred to as leaders from the North Omaha Girls Club, both male and female, were engaged in the photography of nude children. She also indicated that a number of prominent individuals were involved, including doctors and lawyers, although she indicated they used code names and that she could provide no real names for these individuals. Smith also indicated that the adult leaders who took these photographs and used threats against her and others to get them to participate in these photographic sessions. She stated that she had been told on occasions that her entire family would be killed as well as her if she refused to participate in these activities. End quote. Loretta told Officer Carmian that she began participating in what she termed devil worship with other juveniles and adults. She stated that she was approximately 10 and a half or 11 years old when she started attending these rituals, which sometimes included nude photography. Those participating were given something to drink, which she stated tasted like apple juice, but she thought contained some kind of a drug. Smith indicated that Nellie and Kimberly Webb also had reported these activities to police in the past, but that nothing had been done. She stated that the Webb girls had told the superintendent of Fort Calhoun schools, whom she identified as Mr. Finch, and stated that it had been reported to him first, but the girls felt that since nothing was done, that he must have been involved also. In a report dated June 30, 1988, Carmian put down more of what he had learned from Loretta. Quote, during the course of reporting officers' interview with Loretta Isabel Smith concerning child pornography activity as well as devil worshiping, she mentioned the name of Larry King as being a participant and supporter in these activities. Asked how she knew this, Smith stated that she is a friend of the daughter of Gary West. West is reportedly the manager of Max's, a predominantly homosexual bar located south of Central Station at 1415 Jackson Street. Smith stated that she has been to the West residence several times and that Gary West is a homosexual as well as an alcoholic. She stated that when he does become intoxicated, he talks about his certain activities with Larry King and indicated that he is into the use of controlled substances, for example, cocaine, for personal use as well as for sale, and he owes Larry King a lot of money for this. With regard to Larry King, she stated that she knows that he supports devil-worshipping activities. She further indicated that King owns a house on Wirt Street, the exact location of which she did not know, but that King holds various drug and sex parties there. Smith initially told reporting officer that she had been to the Wirt house on one occasion in which she saw 3 or 4 teenage males engaged in oral copulation. It became apparent when Smith began talking about King and West with a lack of specificity that she didn't wish to go into much detail with reporting officer at this time. Reporting officer told her to consider recalling as much information as possible and that she and the reporting officer would talk again at a later date. End quote. On July 5th, Loretta did telephone Officer Carmian and gave him the address and phone number of King's house on Wirt Street. Carmian drove by the house and called the number. The phone was answered by King Company. At the house, Carmian wrote in his log, he observed on a gray awning the name King in black script lettering. During 1988, as Loretta Smith grew to trust the doctors, nurses, and other personnel at Richard Young Hospital, she revealed more detail about what she and other children had been subjected to. Her case file is summarized in a report for the legislature's Franklin Committee by Jerry Lowe, 1989, which gives the dates on which Loretta talked to hospital staff. Loretta. She provided additional information of her previous involvement in cult activity, which included the witnessing of homicides of several young children, and which also included references to Larry King and others involved in the cult activities. August 19, 1988, the hospital notes indicated that Loretta was asked to give a chronological account of involvement in what is described as a devil worship cult, and that Loretta agreed to do this. Loretta indicated that she didn't really know what was happening and that she became involved very gradually. She indicated that when she was approximately 9 years old, she was going to the girls' club in Omaha, and that a guy named Ray would take her and 4 or 5 other girls at the girls' club on outings. He took them to a building that, according to Loretta, looked abandoned and asked the girls if they wanted to go in, which they all agreed to do. Loretta indicated they sat and talked for a while, and then Ray provided a joint, and all of the individuals got high. She indicated this activity continued for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then Ray took them to a party. Loretta indicated that at the party there were about 10 men, all in their mid-30s, and that initially they sat around and talked with the girls about their problems. Loretta indicated that all the people got wasted and that the men at the party made them sleep around and that the girls did not have a choice of who they slept with. Loretta stayed away from the girls' club after this for a few days, but then, in order to get out of the house, she did again begin going to the parties, and they lasted for another 6 months. On one occasion, she threatened to tell her mother that the men were having sex with her and that they knew she was only 9, but the men indicated that they would kill anyone who told about the activities. The men started taking the girls to what the men described as power meetings. Loretta advised she was 10 years old. She indicated that candles and other weird stuff were at the power meetings. According to Loretta, one of the individuals on one occasion told the girls that the room was going to spin for a while, and it did, and she realized later that it was drugs that the men had given them. Loretta advised that about 8 months later, she was put through her first test. Her and other girls were taken to a building in Omaha where she was locked in a room with a little girl, which she described as a Caucasian infant. At about midnight, Loretta indicated that the men came into the room, took the little girl away from her, and told her that she could achieve power by killing something that she really loved. Loretta described that they then cut the little girl's head off, stuck it on the wall, and made her sit in front of it. Loretta indicated later she had to take the head off the wall and that the men held her down while they cut the eyes out of the little girl's head. Then they left Loretta and the girl in the room, locking the door. She was left in the locked room with the little girl for 24 hours, and during this time she could hear another one of the girls screaming. She could hear the men whipping and beating the girl. Shortly after this, the men came into the room and told Loretta that she had passed the test and then drove her a couple blocks from her house and let her out. Loretta indicated the next time she saw the men, she had gone to a friend's house who was having a party and the men showed up. Loretta identified two of the men as Larry King and Mr. Finch, who Loretta indicated was a school principal. Additionally, she identified parties as Ace, King Horse, Jerry Lucifer, and Mike. After one such party, Loretta said another girl called OPD and reported that she was raped and tried to press charges. Other girls covered up the rape for the men. Loretta indicated that she again threatened to tell about the activities, and the men said they would kill her or her mother. At another meeting, Loretta indicated devil worshiping was practiced and that another small boy was sacrificed. Loretta and the other girls were in the other room, and she could hear the little boy screaming. She then indicated the child was fried and eaten by the girls. Loretta indicated she refused to take part in this, so that the men beat her for 2 days. At additional meetings, Loretta indicated the men told her and other girls that they must sacrifice for power and described 3 incidents where further sacrifices took place. The first, a 1-year-old white female had her head taken off by a saw. The second, a 4-year-old white male was hung on the wall and darts thrown at him. And the third, an Indian female, 3 or 4 years old, had several parts of her body cut off, after which it was ground and poured on the girls, and they also were made to drink the remains of the child. August 21st, 88, Loretta indicated the 3rd, 4th, and 5th sacrifices took place during the spring of 1985 when she was 11, and that the parties that were at these sacrifices were Mr. Finch, King Horses, and the big guy she referred to earlier. Between the sacrifices, she indicated that the girls were tested to see if they would keep quiet and how much control that the men had over them. Loretta indicated that the men would try to scare the girls by having them watch as animals were mutilated, and also the men would threaten them by saying that instead of killing them, they would just cut off parts of their bodies and torture the girls and make them suffer. Asked to provide details relative to the first sacrifice of the infant girl, Loretta indicated that at first she didn't cry, and after this, the men cut the eyes out of the girl. Loretta indicated that she freaked out, was screaming and hitting the walls. She said the cult members were wearing what she described as clothes which had upside down crosses on them, and that the leader always wore a long black cape with gold rings shaped like a skeleton head. Loretta went into the Emmanuel Hospital for the first time in November of 1985 and also was in Emmanuel in January of 1986 and March 1986. Then her mother put her in the court system so that she could ultimately get her into Utah Haley, a school and residence for troubled girls. Jeez. To the expert eye of Foster Care Review Board Executive Director Carol Stitt, when she received the reports from Loretta's caseworkers, the girl's testimony appeared highly credible. Stitt explained before the state legislature's executive board on December 19, 1988, one of the things that you want to keep in mind, as horrifying as this is when you review it, this girl is very concrete about who was present at these homicides, what was happening, dates. She gave a lot of specific information, and in working with children, one of the ways you know this is not global fantasy is the more details they give you. The information given to hospital staff and to Omaha police by Loretta Smith overlapped and corroborated what was web what was already in the hands of authorities from the children from the Webb household and from Margot Georgiou and her daughter. From these three separate cases involving pornography, child abuse, and ritual murder, children's testimony and other evidence converged on Larry King. This is the end of chapter 3, and we will start soon with chapter 4, which is called Cover Up, Phase 1, The Police. Thanks so much for listening here at Crowdsourced Illuminations. I'll continue soon with another reading of the book. Again, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And thank you to all my wonderful family I chose with my heart. Good night, love you, and bye.